Thank you for tuning in to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Whether you're listening during your commute, while working out, or just relaxing at home, we appreciate you. Every download, every listen, and every subscription means a lot. Up next, the 12 Kyle podcast.
When we were coming up, the definition of bullied is not the same definition as it is today. A lot of kids, by today's definition, a lot of kids got bullied. But you had to protect yourself. And what I mean by that was at some point in time, you had to put your feet down and say, look, you're not going to do this to me. I'm going to protect myself. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you went looking for the smoke, because that's not how it was. But you had to protect yourself. And if someone invaded you or invaded your property or invaded your space, you had to protect yourself. And I think that was a concept that was really, really emphasized in the 70s and the 80s, was that a man protected himself. And then subsequently, when you moved off and you got a family, you had to protect your family. And so that's something that I still live with to this day. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am your boy, 12 Kyle. I want to thank you all for tuning in as you do each and every week. Shout out to those of you who are watching on YouTube as well as Spotify. Man, check this out. I want to talk about something that came up here recently, and it's the idea and the concept of manhood. I was recently listening to an episode of IMO, which stands for, in my opinion, it's a podcast by First Lady Michelle Obama and her brother, Craig Robinson. And I still refer to her as First Lady because she will always be my First Lady. I don't know what kind of First Lady y'all got right now, but that's another story for another day. But yeah, it's a podcast that she has with her brother, Craig Robinson. And they were talking about manhood, and they asked the simple question, what did you think of manhood as a child? And it made me think, because manhood, I think, is defined by a lot of different things. And I'm going to touch on a couple of things in this podcast. But manhood, as the way it was presented to me in the 70s and the 80s, and then subsequently the 90s, looks a lot different than it does in 2026. But it's something that is fluid, it's something that is constantly changing, and it's also based on, how you perceive things and what's around you. Because, men, or at least the men that I was around in the 70s and the 80s, are a lot different than the men who were in the 90s and the 2000s and the aughts and so forth and so on. And a lot of that had to do with just the family concept. And then also it had to do with our circumstances. I was born in 72, right? So let's say in 1976, I was 4. So the men of 1976, which would have been my father, my grandfather, or my uncles, they had experienced, depending on where they were, if they were in the South, like my mom, they had experienced, the Jim Crow South. My dad grew up in New Jersey, so his experiences as far as racism and stuff like that and segregation was totally different than the life that my mom led in South Carolina. But what I saw as a young boy was never really defined as manhood, but I came to grow and understand what manhood was. So in this episode, what I want to talk about is just to answer their question, what did I think of manhood as a child? And these are in no particular order. Number one, a man was supposed to provide, period, point blank. When I was growing up, I watched shows like Good Times. And, on a show like Good Times, James Evans, who was the father of the show, James always had a job. He had multiple jobs at times, but his job was to put food on the table. His wife, Florida Evans, she didn't work. She just sat around the house. She was a homemaker. She wore a lot of orange and she kicked it. Seriously, but you get my point. So even in my house, my dad worked, my mom worked. Um, and so the men that I knew, my uncles, they worked. And so I've always seen and been around men who worked. And so working was a part of providing. I don't ever remember a time where my brother and I, my younger brother and I, um, sat at the table and there wasn't food. There was always food. Now, I'll be honest, we weren't rich by any stretch of the imagination. Um, we weren't poor either, but we didn't have a lot. But we had a lot looking back on it, but we didn't have a lot looking back on it, if that makes sense. But ultimately, the thing that I took from that was, like I said, you learned that you had to provide for your family. So you had to do whatever you had to do. Now, I do remember men in my neighborhood who I didn't know at the time probably were into some nefarious activities, some illegal activities. They might have ran some numbers, or they might have, shot some dice, or they might have done a little something on the side. I don't know because we were kids, and in the '70s there was an old saying, a child is to be seen and not heard. So like you didn't get into grown people's business. Didn't necessarily mean that you didn't hear grown folks' business, but you didn't get into their business. So I don't know I know I saw men in my neighborhood when we lived in the projects. I saw men in the projects. I saw when we moved out of the projects to the our house. I saw men in my neighborhood go to work every day. So you had to provide. Um, Number two, manhood was defined on your ability to protect yourself and your family. Back in the day, there used to be a lot of fights. Men would fight each other. Uh, I when I was coming up, I don't really remember as a child. I don't remember anybody getting shot. Now, again, I grew up in Florence, South Carolina. It's not, it's not Marcy Projects, it's not Jordan Downs, it's not the rough and tumble that you may think. That being said, but I do remember, going to the basketball court and seeing men get into it and argue, and sometimes it came to fisticuffs before somebody broke it up. Um, but protect in the sense of protecting yourself in your home. A lot of what the manhood that I saw was defined by was the ability to protect yourself. Whether that means you had to throw them hands or you had to protect yourself as far as your property. And men carried guns. They carried little guns, they carried big guns. Nobody had automatic weapons in the '70s, at least I didn't know of, or in the '80s. Um, that wasn't until maybe the back half of the '80s, and I didn't live in neighborhoods where that happened. Um, but I do know that you had to protect yourself and you had to protect your family. And so subsequently, as a man, that's something that I learned very quickly. You had to stand on your own square. And while you never started trouble, you didn't back down from trouble, or you didn't back down from someone challenging your ability to protect yourself. Because here's the thing, when we were coming up, the definition of bullied is not the same definition as it is today. A lot of kids, by definition, by today's definition, a lot of kids got bullied. But you had to protect yourself. And what I mean by that was at some point in time, you had to put your feet down and say, look, you're not going to do this to me. I'm going to protect myself. Now that doesn't necessarily mean you went looking for the smoke, because that's not how it was. But you had to protect yourself. And if someone invaded you or invaded your property or invaded your space, you had to protect yourself. And I think that was a concept that was really, really, you know, emphasized in the '70s and the '80s, was that a man protected himself. And then subsequently, when you moved off and you got a family, you had to protect your family. And so that's something that I still live with to this day. Yeah, I'm not for any trouble. I don't want no smoke. That said, if I don't do nothing else, I will protect myself and my family. Um, because you're not gonna touch me. You're not gonna touch my family. Now you can say what you want. I could let you talk, or I could fatten your lip, one of the two. But I know what comes with that. But if it's me or you and I gotta protect myself or my family, oh, I ain't got no problem going to jail. None whatsoever. I never been to jail. Don't want to go to jail. But for them, bruh. And I think any man listening or watching will say the same. Your family is that's it. And it's not just about the physicality of a fight or a shootout or anything like that. It's about the fact that I stand on this ground right here. I stand on this hill where this house that I'm in sits. This is mine. This is what I've paid for. This is what I've worked hard for. I'm not going to let you come in and disrespect me or my house or my family in the process. That will never happen. I don't stand on that. I'll stand on that forever. And so that's just what we learned. So when you think about protection, if you came up in my era, you might be a little bit more aggressive when it comes to protecting, but that was a part of manhood. Um, Number three, being tough. I know that that's a broad statement, but when we were coming up, being tough was associated with your manhood. Like you couldn't be soft. And I don't mean like soft as in caring or anything like that, but you had to, you know, you had to be tough. Like you couldn't just let people walk over you. To some degree, we were taught, and it wasn't intentional, but we were taught that our manhood didn't allow us to be or show a sensitive side. Now, I think that's BS, but because we all have a sensitive side, regardless of whether or not you want to show it or not. And I'll give you an example. Like I remember one time we were my uncle, my late uncle Sonny, had come down to South Carolina from Chicago, and he was getting ready to leave, getting ready to drive back to Chicago, and my mom was like, "Hey, come on, y'all come in here and give your Uncle Sonny a hug." And I went to go hug him, and I could have been on more like 7 or 8. I went to go hug him, and this dude stuck his hand out. Like it wasn't no hugging, it wasn't no I love yous or none of that. And so we were not really jointed the way that we should have been in a familiar setting. Um a familial setting, I should say. And so I mean, but he was tough. All of my uncles were tough. My dad is tough. My uncle, is still tough to this day. I'm assuming my grandfathers were probably tough guys too. And when I say tough, I don't mean like go to the bar and start a fight, but like you just had to have that exterior, and you had to like not really show weaknesses. Um, there was a point in time that you weren't gonna tell people openly about your innermost feelings, or if you were sad, or if you were down, or if you had a bad day. I mean, like I don't really know much about either of my grandfathers, but I could probably tell you that neither one of them would be sitting on someone's couch spilling their guts saying, "Well, hey, she said this and it hurt my feelings." No, those dudes were tough. They were just, and it's no knock on today's generation or my generation or anybody else. It was just different, but we always associated manhood with being tough. Um, Number four, manhood has always, in our eyes, been defined by being cool. You had to be cool. In the 70s and the 80s, I don't know any grown man that wasn't cool. Even the guys who probably were lame, at the very least, they looked cool. They smoked cigarettes and drank beer. And as a child, that's what we associated with being cool. Um, I did not I never smoked cigarettes. I didn't have my first drink until I was 26 years old. I'm even now. I you might as well say I don't drink because I don't drink. Um, I'll drink champagne. That's about it. But I don't. I've never drank. Never been a fan of beer, anything like that. I've talked about my lack of drinking on this podcast. But anyway, my point in saying that is, like, as a child, that's what we associated with being cool, being able to drink a beer, being able to smoke cigarettes. But not only that, your gear had to be fly. Like, I don't remember. a lot of men I saw growing up at home, at school, well, I'll be honest, wasn't a lot of men at my school, except the janitor. And at work, going to work, at school, church, the men were all fly. Now, how much money they had, I don't know. Like my late Uncle Ronnie, man, my Uncle Ronnie always has my late Uncle Ronnie was the coolest ever. Like we used to call him Duck. And I mean, man, my Uncle Ronnie he always said funny shit. He always did cool stuff. He played the bass, guitar, he could play piano, he could sing his face off. He could work and fix anything ever. I mean, he was in the Air Force at one point. He used to I think his job title was like he was a mechanic on planes or something like that. But I mean, like if your refrigerator broke down, he could fix it in like 10 minutes. If you needed a new engine, he could put it in like a half hour. I mean, like he worked on car. He did everything. But my Uncle Ronnie was the coolest. And so like I don't know of any men um from that era that wasn't cool, and my father included. Cool. And I don't know, maybe there were some men that were lame that were walking around, but I mean, without the advent of social media, we had no idea. So you just had to assume everybody was cool. But yeah, you had to be cool. And so for us, being cool was something that we associated with manhood. If you weren't cool, then you probably weren't a man. And I don't mean that in the literal sense, but like we just associated that with being cool. As I mentioned at the top, I was listening to a podcast, MIO, by First Lady Michelle Obama and her brother, Craig Robinson. And they asked the question, what did you think about manhood as a child? And I'm just going through some things that I defined manhood as a child. Um, so I mentioned being able to provide, being able to protect, being tough, being cool, smoking cigarettes, drinking beer. And I know I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I also want to go back to it. Number five, working. Being able to work, like the idea or the concept of a man not working, that was never ever happening. Um, I don't even remember as a child or as a young adult seeing even men who were, let's say, bound to a wheelchair or something. They did something like just sitting on your ass and not doing something, not working. That didn't happen. Like you either worked at a job, you worked with your hands doing something, you did something. The idea of men just sitting around and not doing anything, like there are men, and prayerfully there are not a lot of them, but there are men who, their women go to work and they just sit at home and do nothing all day. I don't know any men like that. I'm not friends with any men like that. I'm gonna say that I'm not family members with any men like that. Um, and that's not cool. But if a woman allows you to do that, then whatever. But the flip side of it is, yeah, working was something. Even if you lost your job, you had to get another job. And if sometimes you had to get two jobs. And that was just a part of manhood. We associated, and it wasn't, at least for me, it wasn't really so much about how much money you made. Yeah, you knew that there were people who made money, and you knew that there were people who had a little bit more money than you did, or there were people who had a lot more money than you did. But the thing about the people who had a lot more money than you did, those were superstars. Like I know my dad and Michael Jackson didn't have the same bank account, but I associated, you know, the fact that he got up and went to work every day, even when he worked like third shift. So and what was interesting was, well, particularly when we lived in the projects, his job was, I mean, literally around the corner. So he would walk to work. Like it would take him, I don't know, 6, 7 minutes to walk to work. Uh, I don't know how or why he did it in the South Carolina heat, but he did it. Um, but that was something that he had to do. And it was but that goes back to providing. And then also my brother and I were able to see him get up and go to work every day. And subsequently that was something that was instilled in us silently, but still instilled in us nonetheless. Um, Number six, um, no complaining. Like I don't ever recall any men in my life or any men that I was ever around growing up doing a bunch of complaining. Like, you don't like, you state matter of factly what it is. Hey, I need this done. I need that done. I need this done. I need that done. Period. But complaining, oh, my back hurts. Oh, my knee hurts. Oh, I don't know if I can do this because I'm just not feeling good. No, men didn't. Manhood was never, at least for me. Again, I can't speak for anybody else. Maybe y'all could tell me a little different. But manhood was never associated with the ability to complain. Like complaining, and that's not to say that the men of that era that I saw growing up didn't have things to complain about. And who knows? Maybe before my parents got divorced, maybe my dad complained to my mom about, you know, his unwillingness to walk to work or whatever the case may be. That's cool. It was never presented to us. It was never, that was, I never, even when I was around my uncles, or if I was around older men and they were sitting around drinking, or they playing card, they used to have card parties all the time. And, kids, you in the background, you're not in the room with the adults, but you're coming in, you go to the refrigerator, you get some Kool-Aid, you go back in the back room. So even in those settings, men still didn't complain. Like, it wasn't until like I was a young adult where I saw a grown man, on TV complaining about something. Now, did we have our issues and our gripes with things that were going on in the world? Yes. For civil rights, all of that stuff. But that's not complaining. Y'all know what I mean by complaining. There wasn't a lot of bitching and moaning going on with the men that I knew in my era. Next one. It goes without saying, but it's kind of, piggybacks off what I just said. Gossiping. Listen, manhood in my era was never defined by gossiping. You could not gossip. That wasn't something that men did. That was something, not to be, crazy, but that was something that women did. At least that's the way that it was presented. Men don't gossip. Like, we tell each other straight up, like, I don't like you. You're not gonna say, well, hey, you know what? I don't like Ralph. No, you tell a man straight up, I don't like you, or I feel like this about you, or what you did, or what you said. You don't go tell, John about what you feel about Ralph, and then for Ralph to not know about it. No, you told the guy straight up. But yeah, men they gossip. um, that obviously has changed over the years. I mean, you can go just look online. There's a lot of men, and there's quite a few men that get paid handsomely to gossip for a living. Um, it's never been my thing. Like, I'm always, I want to deal with the news. I want to deal with people. I don't, that whole silliness of, well, guess what such and such did, or guess what whoop de whoop did. I don't care. I don't care, and I don't. I'm never gonna say something about you behind your back that I can't say to your face. I'm just cut like that. I'm sorry. I've always been that way. And I've never been approached by a man or a woman to say, hey, you said this. What did you mean by this? No, I can tell you what I said. Maybe you weren't around when I said it, but I'm never going to say it behind your back. Because if I'm man enough to say it, I'm going to say it to you. I'm not going to say it behind your back. And the next one, being able to show emotion, crying, for instance. Manhood was never defined by crying. Uh, and I think that's where we really missed the boat. And what I mean by that is, like, when I was a kid, if you ran outside, you fell down, you hurt your knee, you started crying. What's the first thing your dad or your grandfather or your uncle said? Man, stop all that crying. And what it did was it let us know that sharing your emotions or sharing your feelings or being emotional wasn't tolerated. And I think that's where we missed the boat, because we all have emotions and we all need to express our emotions. It's okay to cry. Some of us cry a lot. Some of us don't cry at all. Some of us cry very sparingly. There are some people that you're walking around that have cried so much in their lifetime already that it's hard for that emotion to stoke up to the point where there are no tears. And I just remember, I'll give you an example. Like, I remember My cousin Eric, it's my right hand man. We're more like brothers. We're cousins, but we're more like brothers. We grew up together. And I remember when his dad died, we went to the funeral, and we were probably, I don't know, we were in our 30s, and his dad had fought cancer for a long time. Eric didn't cry. Everybody else was crying. I teared up, but Eric didn't. He just sat there. He smiled, and and I never asked him about it, but he never cried. And I don't know, he didn't have to. Because his dad's death was a slow process. Not that that makes it any easier, but he was just not emotional about it. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen. I don't think I've seen Eric cry since we were like 7. So um, but that's not to say that you can't be emotional. I'm sure he's probably cried since we were 7. I'm willing to bet that, because I know I've cried since I was 7. Cried when I was 10 when Paul Jones stole my bike, but that's another story for another day. um, but yeah, I think that's where we missed the boat. I think we were subsequently raised as a generation who were told you're not supposed to show emotions. You're not supposed to do this and not supposed to do that. And that's something that I've tried not to pass to my kids. The thing that I try to tell them is be able to control your emotions. So when things don't go your way, there's not a huge outburst. There's not you just spazzing out. There's not you falling on the ground, kicking and screaming, because guess what? The world is going to keep spinning. You can fall on the ground and kick and scream all you want. You can fall on the ground and cry. At some point, you have to get up, dust yourself off, and figure it out as far as how to move and what the next steps will be. But no, you should show emotion. But we always associated with not showing emotion with manhood. And last but not least, manhood was always defined by being able to laugh and have a good time. The 70s and 80s were filled, at least for me in my lifetime, was filled with a lot of laughter and having fun. And I do know that, being around my dad all the time, he was in the house with us until I was 14. And then we saw him, every other day or every weekend from that point forward. And still, to this day, he and I talk every other day. And but our conversations and the things that I saw and dealt with was, good times and laughter, even in tough times. There was a lot of laughter involved. I mentioned my late Uncle Ronnie. Man, especially as I got older and I got to know him even better, uh, man, we used to just laugh with him all the time because he would just say some things. He'd tell us these stories. And they were always funny, and and those stories still stuck with us to this day. Me and my brother and my cousins, we talk about it all the time about how Ronnie used to crack us up. And so I've always, the men in my life, my uncles, my teachers, there was always fun and laughter and having a good time, and we just associated that with manhood. So being able to laugh, being able to laugh at others, being able to laugh at yourself, being able to laugh and joke with your friends, like that was definitely manhood in my book. Um, in conclusion, I thought it was a really good episode. I think First Lady and her brother, they need to continue to work and continue to produce episodes because they're getting a lot of money and they need to put out a little bit more content. But but seriously, I enjoyed the episode, and I really like the fact that they asked that question and it made me think about my life, my childhood, and what it was and how I define manhood. How I see manhood now as an adult is a lot different, but how I saw it as a child, I think, helped mold me into the man that I am, and I'm very thankful for that. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thanks again for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. We drop new episodes weekly. Also, check us out, subscribe, like, and share on Spotify. If you'd like to contribute to us financially, hit us up on Cash App, $ TWELVEKYLE. Also, we have merch. Click the link in the description box that's labeled merch, and there you can buy 12 Kyle Podcast t-shirts, hoodies, and coffee mugs. We got it for the low. And lastly, don't forget about our new baby. It's called the Rap Soul Podcast. It's my music podcast. It's the best music podcast that you have never heard. On the podcast, we talk about music and artists from the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s when it comes to rap, soul, hip hop, and R&B. So make sure that you check it out. Again, that's going to do it for me. I am your boy 12 Kyle. I will catch you guys next time. 5,000. Cheers.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of the 12 Kyle podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and share this podcast with a friend who needs the 12 Kyle podcast in their life. Every listen, every download, and every share helps us grow. Thanks for being a part of the 12 Kyle podcast community. We appreciate your support. We will catch you next time. 5,000.